It's my pleasure to be welcoming you on behalf of the Mussar Institute, where I serve as the Dean, to explore the topic of your spiritual curriculum. I often have the experience that when it comes time to do the session that I planned several months ago, I can't quite remember what it was I was thinking when I made up the topic. But in this case, that's not true. Your spiritual curriculum and the idea of having a spiritual curriculum is so central to the entire process and discipline of Mussar that I can't possibly forget it. To handle it is to share with you some teaching from my new book. And my new book is not out yet. It is completely finished with the publisher. It's all copy edited. And on Friday, we agreed on a cover design. So it's that far along. And it will be out on the bookshelves in August under the title, With Heart in Mind. With Heart in Mind. Mussar Teachings to Transform Your Life. And so this is what I've really been working on. So what I'm doing here is, this evening, is I'm going to dip into my newest work in order to flesh out in a new way, or from a different perspective, what's involved in having a spiritual curriculum. And the underlying notion here is that life is not really that random. The things that happen, the things we suffer from, the things we excel at, and so on, all hang together as some kind of teaching curriculum, as if to say, we're here in this world to learn something, and apply that lesson, and so grow. That life is a journey of growing, and our life experiences are the raw material for that growth. And as you see when we go into what I've selected to discuss with you this evening, it's entirely on the practical plane. It's not esoteric learning about some obscure way of being. It's about everyday life. And our guide for this is actually going to be Pirkei Avot. My entire book, With Heart in Mind, is based on one chapter, not even one chapter, one Mishnah from Pirkei Avot that I'll come back to. The big idea that I explore in my book, that I just want to share with you right off the top here, is the central concern of Judaism is that you and I accomplish a personal spiritual transformation in our lifetimes. That we change is Judaism's driving intention. And that can so easily get lost in the welter of what clutters the Jewish world. Rituals and festivals and liturgy and other performative aspects and building funds and institutions and campaigns and political struggles that are the face, if not the totality, of the Jewish world that so many people experience when they interact with the Jewish world. But the fact remains that at its core, the driving concern of Judaism is personal spiritual transformation. And I'll just bring one example. In the book I discuss it at greater length, but one example is something that everybody will be familiar with, which is Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. If you look at what Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are about, in other words, the holiest days of the year, according to the Jewish calendar, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are about personal change. They're about taking responsibility for what happened in the course of the last year, making amends, making resolutions, expressing regret, etc., and undertaking the kinds of inner processes that will lead to the next year being different, and not a mere repeat of the year before. The Jerusalem Talmud puts it so clearly, because about Rosh Hashanah it says, God said, since you all came for judgment before me on Rosh Hashanah, and you left the judgment in peace, I consider it as if you were created as a new being. That's how transformative Judaism is meant to be, and how much transformation is put at the center of Jewish practice. And the truth is that in our world, and the Jewish world which most of us have either grown up with or encountered in our adult lives, that's a hidden truth. And that the Jewish world has not paid much attention to the personal transformation and change of individuals. And that has not been a beneficial aspect of the way Judaism has played out in our generation. And it is something that we are working hard to correct. And I like to say that in the way that Mussar is being embraced so widely and energetically in the Jewish world, it's the newest old thing in the generation. Redoing ourselves, the project of becoming a new being, is meant to be the central thrust of our lives. And should you think that you are who you are and that change is not at all possible, over 900 years ago, Rambam, Maimonides, affirmed that it is in our hands to decide who we will be. And he said, the Holy Blessed One decrees upon all people at the time of their birth whether they will be good or bad. This is not so. Every person has the potential to be as righteous as Moses or as wicked as Jeroboam. Clever or stupid, merciful or cruel, miserable or noble, or indeed to possess any of the other qualities. Nobody can force you, decree upon you, or lead you into one of the ways, but you should choose a way out of your own free will. That's why it's so central to Judaism, because Judaism really emphasizes the notion of free will. All the idea of responsibility of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, all the idea of the rewards and the punishments, and the whole structure of Judaism, all hinges on the notion that we have free will. Otherwise, how could we possibly be held responsible? But if we have free will, then it's up to us to decide who we should be, how we should be in the world. Nothing is preordained. Nothing is predestined. Where we are right now may create certain limiting conditions, but they aren't locked in, as if to say, we could say, I am who I am, and that's all, to paraphrase Hawkeye. So when we look at our lives, what we see then is that all the content of our lives that we deal with on a regular basis, the people we relate to, the work we do, where we live, the challenges we face, how we respond to those tests, and everything that appears to be there in our lives, these are just the pieces we are given to work with as we pursue growth. And we do grow. Just by living and having experiences, we do grow. You are not identical to who you were 5 or 10 years ago. That is a certainty. I can guarantee it. Even over these long-distance computer wires, I know that each and every one of us who's on this webinar has changed. Judaism's concern is to make the processes of change deliberate and conscious and aimed in a particular direction. So Judaism's concern is to take the natural processes of growth that are built into the life experience and the life process, take those processes, apply free will to them, make them deliberate and conscious so that we grow by design, and then aim those processes of growth in a particular direction. Judaism is wonderful at defining the ideals of human life. We all know so well what Judaism has to say about generosity and kindness and graciousness and patience and love. You should love your neighbor as yourself. These are ancient truths where Judaism has laid out the ideal of what a human being can be and should be. And just as an example, the word chesed, which generally translated as loving kindness, in the 5 books of Moses alone, just the core written Torah, that word appears 248 times. That's how central to Judaism and Judaism's concerns loving kindness is. And that's only one example. all those qualities, from generosity to patience to compassion, are held up as divine qualities we're meant to embody in our own life. And that's where the challenge comes in. Because the reality is, the reason these are challenges and the reason these are held up as ideals is because we, in the way we live our ordinary lives, feel ourselves pulled down towards a kind of behavior, attitude, thoughts, and feelings that really don't live up to those ideals. We're challenged to be compassionate because the lazy heart is not compassionate. We're challenged to be patient because the lazy heart, I think the one that doesn't pull itself up above the force of gravity that pulls us down, is not patient, and so on through all the other ideals Torah sets out for us. The goal, the way the Mussar teachers express it, is that we have the potential to be whole. Shalem. We can pursue shlemut, wholeness. That's really very clear. That's clear in the Mussar literature. That the way we are right now, in all cases, involves some kind of challenge, some kind of partialness, some kind of maybe even brokenness. That is our spiritual curriculum. Each of us has our own specific set of challenges, partialness, brokenness. That is your spiritual curriculum. It is your personal spiritual curriculum. What's on my spiritual curriculum is not the same as what's on your spiritual curriculum. Because my issue of impatience may be exactly mirrored in the sense of opposite in you, not because you're impatient, but because you have difficulty being motivated, being energetic, and getting up and doing the things you need to do. So the idea is, the core idea is personal spiritual curriculum, focused on the potential to grow, taking that growth potential, that process of growth built into the life system, making it deliberate and conscious and aimed in the direction of wholeness, and also, the Mussar teachers say, in holiness, kedusha. That notion of aiming towards being holy is where this whole process links up with the Torah. Because the idea of being holy is directly from the Torah. Where the Torah says, "Kedoshim tihiyu," you shall be holy. It's really providing, from a Jewish point of view, the job description of a human being. We're not in this world to become wealthy. We're not in this world to become beautiful or popular or whatever else might be a worldly goal celebrated in advertising. The Torah brings a goal that is not celebrated in advertising, is not a product, cannot be packaged, cannot be sold. It's holiness. And that is where the life growth potential is meant to be aimed. We grow, but we can grow in almost any way because we have free will. And Judaism says the highest possibility of a human being is to grow in the direction of spiritual elevation, holiness. So let's go into what I wanted to draw from my own book. I've selected 6 sections because they all are, it's part of one area, it's one part that has 6 chapters. And the structure of the book is based on Mishnah 6:6 of Pirkei Avot. So it's the 6th chapter and the 6th teaching or section of the 6th chapter. And Pirkei Avot only has 6 chapters. Originally, when it was written, and it's part of the Mishnah, which means that it was compiled by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi around the year 200. So it's about 1,800 years old. That's why I say it's the newest old thing in the generation. About 1,800 years ago, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi determined that it was time to write down the oral tradition. There were reasons, circumstantial reasons at the time. There was a very strong prohibition against writing it down, but he took it upon himself to say that if we don't write down the oral Torah, we're in danger of losing it. And so he wrote it down, and part of writing down the Mishnah which later got complemented by the Gemara, which put together became the Talmud. But the Mishnah was the first step in recording the oral Torah. He included the book of Pirkei Avot. Now, you may be familiar with it. The most common way that title is translated into English is as Chapters of the Fathers. And certainly the word Perek means chapter, and Avot is from Av or Abba, father. But the word Av is used in another sense, halakhically, in terms of Jewish law, to mean a core principle, a root principle, like the trunk of a tree from which the branches of other principles come out. And so the more accurate, and I think closer to the intention originally, is to say that what Pirkei Avot is the chapters of the root principles. That's what we have in Pirkei Avot, and that's part of what sent me into it, looking for core teachings that I could work with to bring into our generation as I do my work of exploring what the Mussar teachers in all the intervening centuries and generations had to offer us, and still have to offer us, by way of living fulfilling lives that fulfill the potential of what a life could be and should be. And of course that draws on the depths of Jewish tradition and is rooted and anchored right back in the Torah, because what we're told, in summary, is that we have the potential to be whole, and we have the potential to be whole. That's what our lives are for. And one of the great Mussar teachers of the last century, the 20th century, Rabbi Levinstein, said, the primary purpose of a human life is to purify and elevate the soul. That's what all this is for. That's what all this is about. That's what all the tests are about. That's what love is about. That's what interaction in everyday life is about. That's all these challenges come, and all these pieces of the puzzle that are your life, they reveal the curriculum. It is the pathway to the growth towards wholeness and holiness that the Jewish tradition says. So there are 48 methods given in Pirkei Avot 6.6. They're couched as the 48 methods for acquiring Torah. That's what they're called in Pirkei Avot. But it's very interesting because acquiring Torah, you have to ask the first question, what does that mean? You might think it means, well, learning Torah. That's one. The first of the 48 is learning. So, Talmud. It actually says, that's what it says, Talmud. So if the first of the 48 methods is learning, then acquiring Torah means something different from learning, because learning is just one of the methods. And what I'm just mentioning briefly, but I explore it much more in my new book, the idea that to acquire Torah is to take these deep teachings and to integrate them and internalize them so that they become deeply rooted as part of who you are. They are the transformative methods. If you just learn them intellectually, they are information. When you acquire them, they become part of your essential being. They are rooted and buried in your soul. And that becomes a very different level of acquiring Torah rather than learning Torah. Then it really becomes you, and it becomes an essential part of who you are and your being. So what this is about is transformation, because I've made the proposition that Judaism is a religion very concerned with our personal transformation. And Pirkei Avot provides us 48 methods of personal transformation that are the newest old thing in the generation. Now, the 6 I've chosen to just explore with you briefly this evening all begin with the same word, which is why they constitute a subgroup out of the 48. 6 out of the 48. That word is miyut, which can mean make less or diminish, and in practice it means to limit. Each of these 6 areas we get suggested by Pirkei Avot, suggests to us that in each of these 6 areas of life, it is an important spiritual practice to limit our engagement in each of these 6 areas. For example, and this is the first one, limit sleep. The second one is limit conversation. Now, I just mentioned those two as examples because I want to make a very important point here. Although Pirkei Avot says limit or lessen your engagement with sleep or conversation or the other four things we're going to look at, it's consistent with what I said in my introduction that each of us has a personal spiritual curriculum. What that means is that what is true for you may not be true for me. When Pirkei Avot says limit sleep, how does that apply to a person who's an insomnia? A person who their deepest wish would be a full night's sleep? Well, the answer is it doesn't. Not in the way it's phrased. What Pirkei Avot is addressing is the majority. And for other people who are at other places on the range of possibilities, they need to look at these same areas and address them in different ways. But as I'm going to express them this evening, and as Pirkei Avot guides us, we're dealing here with the majority of people, and as you'll see when we come to the conclusion, and I point out what's involved in all six when you take them together, you'll see that it's talking about a principle of human life for which these are six examples. So, as we look through these, as we go through these, what I want to ask you or invite you to ask yourself is, how does this apply to me personally? In other words, how does the topic at hand show up on my personal spiritual curriculum? And when I say limit sleep or limit conversation, your challenge is to say, I don't need to limit sleep. I need to figure out how to sleep more, and that's how it applies to me. Or alternatively, it may be that this is speaking exactly to a tendency that you can identify with because this is how it fits into your spiritual curriculum. In any case, you want to be learning about your own life, applying these lessons personally, and figuring out through this how you can make change in the direction of the ideal. Okay, so let's look at limiting sleep. This is actually method number 15 out of 48, and all the other ones come in succession. That's where it is. We all know that sleep is a necessity to refresh body and spirit, and there's almost no better torture that people have come up with than to deprive people of sleep. If you keep someone awake for 48 hours, they will tell you whatever you want them to say. It is so necessary for us that that's literally considered a form of torture. But the guidance that Pirkei Avot gives us is to limit sleep, and that makes clear that the more common situation involves the tendency to sleep too much. There are Jewish notions of how much a person should sleep, and the Rambam, Maimonides, rules that the average adult needs 6 to 8 hours of sleep. And he notes that if a person sleeps in order to rest his or her mind and body so that they won't become sick and therefore will be, through becoming sick, become unable to serve God, in that case, sleep is considered to be service of God. And there are other sources which really, in the Jewish world, praise sleep. We're not supposed to do without sleep. And, on the other hand, there's an age-old Jewish spiritual practice, very big in the Kabbalistic world, of waking at midnight to study Torah and meditate in heartfelt prayers. And it's not hard to find the reason why. Because in the Torah, we find a verse that says, keep this Torah always on your lips, meditate on it day and night. And that's all that our teachers needed to hear was day and night, and they have instituted practices of studying the night. And where that comes down in our generation most commonly is on the festival of Shavuot or Shavuos, where the tradition is to stay up all night and study Torah. And then Talmud puts it poetically because it says, the moonlight was created for the study of Torah. The moonlight was created for the study of Torah. But leaving aside special nighttime practices, I just want to acknowledge that there are such things where limiting sleep like that is involved. The real reason we're being given to limit sleep is simple and different. It's that life is precious and there is much to do. And if we're sleeping it away then we're not taking advantage of the limited number of minutes and breaths that are given to us, and we're spending them in the amount of sleep that we're getting that in excess is really a waste of life. And the Altar of Navardic, the Mussar teacher from the late 19th, early 20th century said, or equipped, the trouble with people is that they want to change overnight and have a good night's sleep that night too. And his point is that we sign on to the goal. I teach about Kedusha and Shleimut and reaching the ideal. And it also sounds so wonderful. I want to do that. But very often people are unwilling to make the sacrifices that lead to accomplishing it. At the same time as wanting to grow spiritually, there can be a tendency to pull the covers up and pull it up over yourself and sleep a little more and a little bit excess. What we learn here from this teaching of the Altar of Navardic, that the issue is actually not sleep. Sleep is necessary for health. It can't really be the issue. The issue is laziness. It's laziness that has us spending extra hours under the blanket beyond the amount of sleep that the body needs. We get committed to action, but laziness brings us down. We accept, sometimes we even manufacture, we become very creative, a myriad of excuses to rationalize inaction. And again, just a note, which I won't repeat anymore, this is applying to the majority. You may have to interpret this for yourself into your particular situation. There's no sense of trying to say this is for everyone. But for the majority, laziness is more of, we're being told, the source tells us that laziness is more of an issue. And the ultimate source of our laziness is a tendency to be indolent due to the Yetzer Hara, this inbuilt impulse in us, which is our spiritual adversary. We, in our conscious beings, in our highest selves, make a commitment to our spiritual ascent, and deep down inside there is embedded another force within us that creates every obstacle and every rationalization to keep us from rising up as we intend. And that's how this counterforce directs your life. As long as you are asleep, literally or metaphorically, you can't do what's required of you or that to which you aspire, especially if we're talking about excess of sleep. Each of us needs to get the right amount of sleep to keep our minds and bodies healthy. Less is torture, more is indulgence. The sleep we get at night in bed, however, is not the only form of sleeping we do. We also need to minimize the amount of sleep we get even while we're technically awake. In other words, people can go through life with their eyes open but really be sleepwalkers. And we need to be very vigilant and not lead our lives like that, because the entire teaching of Mussar is about waking up to how our life really is and what it could be, and what we have to do to walk those steps between where we are and where we could be. And the Rambam again, Maimonides, he explains the commandment to blow the shofar in Rosh Hashanah like this. He says, even though blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a divine decree, because it's from the Torah, it contains an allusion, A-L-L, allusion. And he says, "Oh, you sleepers, awaken from your sleep. You slumbering ones, from your slumber. Search your ways and repent and remember your Creator." So he's calling on us to wake up. And that's what Rosh Hashanah is about. That's the shofar is about, to wake up. Which brings me back to the theme, and this reinforces the whole idea that Judaism is calling on us to undergo a transformation, and the first step in that transformation is to wake up. If you don't wake yourself up, who will? Sleep. Second, number 16, limiting conversation. A similar kind of thing, only different. Because speech, like sleep, is great. Imagine without speech. I have a 10-month-old granddaughter. So she's young. She's 10 months old. She's not. She's just at the age where she might possibly be beginning to speak the song. So my daughter and her husband, my son-in-law, have taught Violet to. They say, "Where's your head?" And she puts her hand up on her head. And they say, "Violet, where's your head?" And she goes like this. So they made a little video and they sent it to us of Violet doing that. And all of a sudden, Violet says, "Head." And as wonderful as it is that she knows where her head is and she can interpret and she can do what's being asked of her, when she said, "Head," whew, that was like, the whole world stopped for a moment there, because the ability of a human being to grasp, and not just grasp, but to have all the mechanics, and the intellectual mechanics and the physical mechanics, to make it possible to identify and then come out with the appropriate sound to say, head is just, there's no way that speech is anything but marvelous, and it's even defined in some ways that the nature of a human being, you get this in the birth position, that the essential nature of a human being is a speaking soul. And that is because speech is so central. Of course, in Judaism, how was the world created? How was the world created? The world was created by God speaking. He says this, and God said this, and this was created. And then God said this good. And where are the central commandments that define Judaism? They're called Aseret HaDibrot. Aseret HaDibrot. We say in English the 10 Commandments. That's not what it is in Hebrew. In Hebrew, it's the 10 utterances. Dibrot. They're not commandments. They're called utterances. Speech. Speech is so central. Okay, so we know just like sleep, we've got a good quality here, but what's the negative in conversation? The negative in conversation, and the reason why it's meant to be limited, is not about speech itself. It's about wasted speech. It's about useless speech. It's about negative speech. Now, this idea of limiting conversation is not about gossip. It's not about slander. It's not about negative speech. Those are prohibited. The Mishnah wouldn't be coming and telling us, you should limit the amount of slander you do, or you should limit how many rumors you spread. That's because those are forbidden. So it's not asking us to please cut back a bit. It'll be okay to cut back a bit. Those are out of the question. So what it's talking about in reality is permitted chit-chat, permitted conversation, the kind of things that we can feel, again, as we do with sleep, we could fill hours of our day just with basically useless, trivial conversation. There's so much of that that goes on. It's remarkable. It's a stuff which is like mist, in that when you're driving through a fog, it looks very substantial. And as soon as the sun comes up, it dissipates and you realize it had no substance whatsoever. And, I'm going to use a couple of examples here, and I have to do a qualification again to say that there's nothing inherently wrong with sports or film and that kind of thing. But, we've just come through the Winter Olympics where the amount of conversation about the Olympics is enormous. It fills the airwaves in every possible way. And then as soon as it's over, everyone looks the other way. And it's gone. It's off the screen. It's of no concern. It's of no substance. It's just filling the world. And it's the same thing you see around the Oscars or any other kind of television awards, the Emmys. That it's huge. It's conversation. Everyone's talking about it at the water cooler. People are talking about it here and there. And then as soon as it's over, it's gone. So I was in Los Angeles recently, just like 3 weeks ago, and I was speaking to an audience, and I said to them, so I figured this was Los Angeles. I said, which film won the Oscar for Best Picture 2 years ago? In Los Angeles, nobody knew. Best Picture 2 years ago, nobody knew. So in order to be balanced in terms of activities of interest, and just because it was around the same time, I said, so which team won the Super Bowl 2 years ago? Nobody knew. And these become big topics of conversation. And the fact that they slip out of our minds, they are not remembered, tell us they are of no consequence whatsoever. And This is what the Torah, in the sense of Pirkei Avot, is warning us about. If our minds are filled with constant chatter, then we limit the possibilities of what our minds can do and what our minds can give us. Rabbi Akiva says silence is a protection for wisdom. Silence is a protection for wisdom. And my own Mussar teacher, Rabbi Ter, says, if you don't experience silence, then you'll never hear the thoughts that come to you from heaven. It's an interesting idea. You sometimes think, but where'd that idea come from? Where'd that thought come from? There's a creative idea. I didn't know I knew that. Rabbi Ter says, those are the thoughts that come from heaven. And in order to have those thoughts, you have to be quiet. The chit-chat, the conversation is valuable. It's how people connect to each other. It's how people share information. There's so much that is fantastic in speech. But if it is being spent on useless talk, to me that's like delivering pizzas with a Rolls Royce. It's a trivialization of something which is a magnificent creation. No, it does. We say, Lahabdil. I'm not saying a Rolls Royce is as great as speech. It's just Rav Kook, who was a great teacher of the last century and the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Israel, he said, some silence means cessation of speech. Another silence means cessation of thought. That silence arrives together with the most hidden, beautiful, and exalted thought. There is a way of thinking that is beyond the inner conversation, beyond discursive thought. There is a way of perceiving. There are messages that can only be perceived. As he says, beautiful, hidden, beautiful, and exalted. Those thoughts that are hidden, beautiful, and exalted. They only come when we are able to be silent. And you know these things. When you've gone for a walk in the woods at dawn, or you're on a boat at sunset. There's times, and again, this has been well understood by the movie industry, there are times in the world which have kind of quiet about them. And those times are teachers to us. That as long as we fill our lives with conversation, as long as we're chit-chat, then we can't hear the thoughts that are waiting for us, that are hidden, beautiful, and exalted. So here we have the second area in which we're being directed to limit our participation in something that is good. It's that limitation that becomes important. I've given two detailed examples. I'm going to go through the other four quite quickly because now you get an idea of how the Mishnah is thinking, and you can see that it works in terms of the other four. Chapter 17 is limiting our engagement in work and business. Sleep, conversation. Now we're up to work and business. Again, this is warning us about a tendency that affects the majority. The majority of us work too much. The demands of the work world, the demands of financial life, the culture, the economy we live in, and of course there are people who can't get work. There are people who would do anything to get work. I've just suffered with a friend of mine who was out of work for a year and a half, and thank God he just got a job. We know those cases too. That's not the majority. I think the unemployment rate we're talking about in our country is about 7%. Depends on where you are. But, okay, so there are those, that's 7%. The other 93% who are employed, the tendency in our world that we mostly know about is that people are too busy. People are too engaged with their work ethic. It's kind of like almost a badge of pride. So say one person there, how are you? Oh, so busy. No, I can't keep up on my email. It's like, that's just the way it is. I'm wondering if you maybe can appreciate this way of life. I certainly know that that's the way I am in my life. There's just unlimited demand to work, work, work. But in another place, in particular, what Rabbi Meir says, minimize your business activities and occupy yourself with Torah. And this is actually the guiding principle. If we get involved with business activities and money and work, etc., it fills all the daily space. And we know that. We see it happen to other people, and we see it happening to ourselves. And what Rabbi Meir is telling us, why we're supposed to cut back on our worldly endeavors, not so that we'll have more leisure time, not so that you can sit at the 19th hole and sip pink ladies, or take cruises from one indistinguishable port that you can't remember the name of to the next indistinguishable port that you can't remember the name of. That's not why. The point is that if we're so involved with our business activities, then we're not going to be involved to that extent in our spiritual activities. So it's a question of balance. And there's a great story with the Chafetz Chaim. He supported his family by running a store, a business. And when the business made a certain amount of money, he closed the store. He knew how much money he earned. He knew what his needs were. And he would close the store. And so it was by the time the business was established, he would open his store only half a day. Why? That was enough. That's what he needed. He didn't need to be working all the time, making maximum amounts of money so that it was a goal. And we look, goal of itself, just to maximize income. And if you look in the Talmud, you see that all the rabbis, who's so famous for his sayings, if I'm for myself, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me, etc. He was a wood chopper. Shammai was a builder. Rabbi Hilkiah was a field laborer. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was a businessman. Abba Shaul dug graves, and so on. Everybody had a job. And in fact, this was a principle. It says that, in fact, one classic rabbinic phrase says, a person should love work and not hate it, for just as the Torah was given with a covenant, so too was work given with a covenant. But when it takes over, when it becomes a compulsion, when it occupies too much of life, then we need to limit the time spent in working so that it doesn't squeeze every other important activity out of our lives. Let's go on to another one. This one is a little different. Limiting laughter. Mitzvot. Now, there's nothing wrong with laughter. It's the same as work or conversation or nothing wrong with it. But a person who is giddy, who is lightheaded, who sees only the funny side of life, doesn't see anything serious, that person is confronting a spiritual obstacle. Now, you know as well as I do that the Jewish world has no problem with humor. How many Jewish comedians have there been? How many good Jewish jokes are there? Somebody once asked Rabbi Ariel Kaplan whether there were jokes in the Talmud. And he replied, yes, there are, but they're all very old. So this is, only a Jew could answer a question like that with a joke, and a good joke too. And again, laughter is praise. Laughter, there's a story in the Talmud about Elijah pointing out two men in the marketplace, and he says, these two are destined to the world to come, to eternal life. And the rabbi who's questioning Elijah says, who are they? He says, they're comedians. We make people laugh, and we make peace between warring parties because they know how to use humor. And it's very important to have a sense of humor. In a very famous contemporary Mussar book written by a rabbi called Ali Shor, which we have, of course, the course called Mussar in Action that we offer is based on this book, Ali Shor. He has a section where he talks about a particular midah, particular quality, a tendency to be overly scrupulous in the sense of really paying attention to every teeny detail obsessively. And he says the counter quality you should work on in order to nullify or negate that tendency to be overly attentive to the minutiae of life, he says his sense of humor. He calls it, in Hebrew, hush humor. So the word humor, from English, is the Hebrew word for humor. Okay, so we praise humor, we have lots of room for humor in our life, but we're cautioned against two particular kinds of humor. One is mockery. The humor that takes advantage of other people. So much of what passes for humor in our culture is actually mockery. And mockery, it is said that the divine presence, the Shekhinah, does not sit among mockers. The other kind of humor we're cautioned against is simply excessive humor, excessive laughter. Kalat rosh, to have a light head. Because the work we are here to do, the spirituality, the idea of purifying and elevating our soul, it's not a lightheaded business. There's a role for humor. Rabbi Ter says, laughter and tears, which means there's laughter. But if you see in yourself, it's much easier to see it in other people, of course, but I'm really wanting to bring it back to yourself. If you see it in yourself, the tendency to not really be serious, to laugh about everything, to laugh excessively, to just always be trivializing by making fun. Even the word fun itself is a sense of the triviality that can come. Is really missing out on the profundity of life. It negates a notion like holiness, because holiness might be enjoyable, and there might even be laughter and humor, but it's not going to be fun. It's not Disney. There's a deeper level. So we're being cautioned by the mission here not to hold ourselves at the level that fun exists, but make ourselves available to the deeper level, the real spiritual depth lies. Number 19 goes right into a related area, which is pleasure. Miut Talmud. Now, again, is there a problem with pleasure? Does Judaism have a problem with pleasure? Not at all. Are we supposed to eat well at appropriate times and to have sexual life? We don't have celibacy in our tradition. In the one day a year, well, there's other days too, but I mean in Yom Kippur, when we really afflict ourselves, what's considered affliction? No sexual activity, no washing and bathing, no anointing, no eating, no drinking. These are the pleasures of life. When you're without them, it's called affliction. And there's a teaching in the Jerusalem Talmud that says that when you come to give your final reckoning after you die, you will be held accountable for every pleasure of the world that was available to you that you did not take, that you did not taste. So again, this is a praiseworthy area, but it's so easy to lose ourselves, and pay attention to that phrase, lose ourselves, in a bag of potato chips or a chocolate bar, and even more so in more intense forms of physical sensation, lose ourselves and become devotees of the perfect cup of coffee, the smokiness of a single malt scotch, the thread count of organic cotton sheets. It can become idolatry. And I think it is idolatry. I think it's no different from idolatry. It may not be in the shape of some anthropomorphic deity, but I think there are people who are devoted to physical pleasures as their deity, where they bow down, where they give their lives and all their activities for those physical pleasures. And the Maharal explains, the more you're involved with physical sensations, the more you're involved with the body, the more bodily you become. Whereas the idea of holiness, elevating and purifying the soul, is about becoming more spiritual. So there's nothing wrong with the physical. Judaism loves the physical and encourages us to experience the physical. But to do it in a way that lifts the physical into the spiritual and brings them together by spiritualizing the physical. That's why we have the whole process of brachas, of blessings. That when we do something as physical as go to the bathroom, or eat, or see something, or smell something, that we say a blessing to bring it into the context, the larger context, and situate it in a spiritual consciousness and a spiritual world. When we indulge excessively in physical pleasure, then we are mistaking the means for the end. That the physical is a way of experiencing the godly in life, but we have to call to consciousness that this is a spiritual experience happening in a physical form, not just a physical form. And we have to be very careful about becoming idolatrous around physical things. Again, if we talk about eating, there are people for whom lack of food is surely the issue. Or people who are starving themselves with anorexia or bulimia, where the issue is not overindulgence. God acknowledges that. For the majority in our world, obesity there's a much larger proportion of the population that is tending towards obesity than it is towards eating disorders of the other kind. And for most of us to be able to rein in our desire for physical sensations and physical satisfactions and physical fulfillment, that's really what the Mishnah is pointing us to. And I'll just underline again, this is a voice from 1,800 years ago. We had a talent show at a recent Mussar and Rabbi Misa Berger said, "What is a talent show at a Mussar conference?" So people did various different things. His talent that he showed, he went to the front of the room with a bag of potato chips and he ate one. That's a Mussar talent, because the physical was contained. It was limited. And the last one of these 6 is to limit mundane activities. Derech-eretz. Mute derech-eretz. Now, if you're familiar with that term derech-eretz, mostly it's used in the Jewish context in a positive sense. A kid who is polite to adults. Somebody who answers the phone in a nice way. Someone who stands up respectfully to someone else, maybe offers someone else a seat. Things that are not governed by sin or virtue, but are just good ways of being in the world, are derech-eretz. But derech-eretz is literally the way of the land, and there's a way of being that is so involved with good behavior and just ordinary etiquette that we can also become so engrossed or so satisfied with worldliness that we are more concerned with how we're dressed, how our hair looks, whether our teeth are white or not. Now, it's very appropriate to have clean teeth and to care for yourself and groom yourself well, but to become overly engaged with the ways of the world is again something that the Mishnah cautions us about, because it says, is this what life is for? Is life for all the ordinary transactions and interactions of everyday life? So it cautions us to limit our involvement in the ways of the world, in derech-eretz, in the things that we see people around us doing. Just because other people do it and consider it normal, we should be the governors of our own lives, making our own decisions about what we consider to be the priorities in our lives. Derech-eretz is worldly. And of course, coming from Torah and Mussar, the priority we're meant to emphasize is spiritual. So I covered 2 quite in-depth to sort of set the paradigm and give you the idea, and then I went over 4 of these quickly. We went in depth into limiting sleep, limiting conversation, and then more quickly through limiting work and business, limiting levity, limiting pleasure, physical pleasure, and limiting mundane activity. Now, in every case, there's a possibility that a person may be challenged by a personal spiritual curriculum that's quite divergent from the majority. I really wanted to emphasize that. I've made the point all along, and this may be important for you to hear, because if you really do have trouble sleeping, it's not a good message to hear, you should limit your sleep. You've got to be able to hear this in personal terms. Mussar acknowledges that each of us has our own curriculum. One size does not fit all. But for most of us, that's what Pirkei Avot is saying, for most of us, the issue is to establish limits in each of these areas. I think that's made really clearly by what I was saying about employment. It is true that 7% of the North American population is unemployed. There's probably a crisis for those 7%, but it's in the nature of a teaching that addresses the world at large to recognize that it needs to talk to the 93% primarily, and that's what it does. And then 7% need to look for a different spiritual curriculum. Why limits? Because each of these areas in and of itself is good. And so the measure of a spiritual seeker comes into focus not on the activity itself, but on personal mastery in that area. When we look at all 6 areas in which Pirkei Avot urges us to develop mastery, we can see that they all represent the physical and the worldly. That's the ultimate teaching here, and it contains a very Jewish perspective. The world is wonderful. It offers us so much. We'd be fools and even sinners if we turned away from enjoying this world just as it was created and as it presents itself to us. But even then, we must be careful not to let the pleasures of the world, that warm bed, making money, interacting with other people, conversation, we have to be careful not to let those become our master. But our challenge is to strive for mastery, even as we engage with and enjoy the world. This is why it's such a Jewish teaching, because it's not that we should turn away from the world, and it's certainly not seeing great virtue in not indulging with the world, in other words, not partaking of the world. The image of the whole person, the Holy One, that the Mussar teachers hold out to us, is of a person who is a master of their desires and master of their engagement with the world. When I was in Los Angeles, I mentioned 3 weeks ago, I met with a journalist and I was using the word holiness. And she asked me, how do you define holiness? Now, I mentioned it as a journalist because I didn't think it was really going to be useful to quote what Rashi says about holiness or Ramban says about holiness. So just off the top of my head came the idea, which has antecedents. I know where I got this from. There are teachings that I learned that holiness is mastery over self-interest. Holiness is mastery over self-interest. And what Pirkei Avot is showing us is that very often our self-interest has a worldly side, so that holiness becomes mastery over our engagement with worldliness. And so, to close, I invite you to look at your own life to see where it is that the world masters you, rather than you being the master of your engagement with the physical and the world. Where are you involved with idolatry of the physical? Where are your desires the governing force in your life? And when you can identify such places in your own life, unique to you, your own particular case, you'll be looking right at your personal spiritual curriculum. This is your assignment. That's why you are the way you are. That's your assignment. When you master it, you fulfill your purpose in the world. When it masters you, then you have to wonder what life is about. With that, I'm going to close to exactly 1 hour, but I'm going to invite, let's see if there are any questions, if I can open up my chat. I can succeed in this. Okay. Okay. I'll go through some of these questions. I didn't notice because I was having trouble seeing chat while I was talking. Just a couple questions are already asked. And please type into the chat box here. Amy Leader asks, do I believe that we were born with our curriculum? That's very interesting. There's a source, Orpha Tzadikim, published in the 16th century. It means the paths of the righteous, Tzadikim. And if you look at the introduction to that book, you'll see that it says you get your spiritual curriculum from four different places. One is your bodily nature, in other words, genetics. One is what we might call inclinations. Not exactly physically based, but it's like talents or just the way a person is inclined. The third one is through life experience. You may not be born with something, but your life experience drums it into you. Through a trauma, through a joy, or whatever it may be, you learn from experience. And the fourth is that you actually choose your curriculum in some cases. You may choose to develop yourself in an area that you don't have an inclination or a strength. My older daughter was a ballet dancer in high school. She really was not very talented. She had what she kept blaming me for. I hope she never hears this webinar because I'm probably breaching confidence. But my whole side of the family tends to have a rather heavy rear end. And she had inherited that, which was not ideal for ballet dancing. But she persisted and she so developed herself that when she got accepted to medical school, I said to her, Julia, I'm so proud of you. I saw what you had to go through to get into medical school. That was so great. And she said, without missing a beat, she said, I learned it in dance. She shaped her character by choice through choosing her curriculum. So Orpha Tzadikim was our guide here, that you can recognize some things are genetic, some things are inborn at a kind of inclination level. Some things come from school, and some things we can choose. I don't see any more questions coming. I may have bludgeoned you with 6 different teachings. I hope not, because they all have one thing in common. There are 6 examples, and you may be able to pick up on one or the other. But there is a wholeness to the 6, and they do have a theme, which is that over-engagement in worldliness is something we need to master, not by giving up worldliness and going to live naked in a cave in the desert, but by mastering ourselves. When we master ourselves, that's how we master worldliness. But mastering ourselves is the goal, because that is the process of purifying and elevating the soul. So with that, I wish you blessings on the journey. I hope there was something of value in this. And you'll be able to get more, of course, once my new book comes out in August. So thank you very much. I wish you blessings.